Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 15th. Today we celebrate St. Swithun's Day, and we'll also learn about the English architect who brought classical Roman architecture and the Italian Renaissance to gardens. We celebrate the botanist who attempted to sell his cow in order to buy a botany book by Robert Morrison. And we also celebrate the birthday of a botanist and a teacher of Emily Dickinson. And we'll also learn about the grand opening of Niagara Falls. Today's poems feature insects, and we grow that garden library with a book about making gardening and yard work less work and more enjoyable. And then we'll wrap things up with a heartwarming story about a beloved gardener and a journalist from Ireland. But first, let's catch up on some gardener greetings from around the world and today's curated news. First up is an email from Jill in Roseville, Minnesota, who asked if I could identify what was eating her milkweed. She shared a picture of a leaf from her milkweed, and it had these little tiny caterpillars all over it. And if you're growing milkweed, you just may run across a similar thing. These small little caterpillars are actually milkweed tussock moth, and they rely on the milkweed as well, just as the monarch does. Now, to deal with this, you can either remove them, or if you have plenty of milkweed, you can let them be. It's really up to you. Now, milkweed tussock moths are just like the monarch in the sense that they need milkweed to survive as well, although they can also eat dogbane. So they have a little bit more diversity in terms of their host plant options. And this is the challenge when we put something in our garden, whether it's milkweed or anything else, and we're hoping to attract a certain species. Well, you just may attract another species that you had no idea about. So this is really an opportunity to learn about the relationships between plants in our garden and other living creatures. Now, as for my garden, I have a number of milkweed plants in a variety of locations. So if I encountered this situation, I would probably leave these guys alone in the hopes that some of my other milkweed patches would be sufficient for the monarch. Now, if you don't have that luxury, if you have a smaller garden and you really want your precious milkweed to be reserved for monarchs, then you'll have to control things like these other species that may find their way to your milkweed. So something to consider. All right, next up is a birthday greeting for Mary Elizabeth. She's 75 years old today, and her daughter sent in a picture of her standing in front of her sunflowers. Mary Elizabeth is a lifelong gardener, and she says it's her secret to staying young, and I couldn't agree more. Well, before I close out gardener greetings here, I just have to say that this morning I'm recording on my deck, and I've been watching this robin building a nest. And then she's flying up about 30 feet to this pine tree in front of me, really, really tall old pine tree that's part of this old growth forest that's all around this area up here where we're at. And she keeps grabbing my attention as she's swooping down to find material to build her nest. Oh, there she goes again. Anyway, it's just part of the wonderful thing about being able to record outside. And it's a wonderful benefit of just being able to sit in the garden, which I hope you get a chance to do today and every day for that matter. Primarily because it's so grounding. It's so good for us to be out in nature. And we're living through a very difficult time. And that takes a toll. And I don't know about you, but every now and then it gets to me and it just hits me. And I miss the way things used to be. Yesterday, I was sitting on my couch and I just had this moment where I started crying. And my youngest son came up to me and he's like, "What's going on? What's the matter?" And I just said, it's nothing in particular. It's just that I miss just going somewhere. And don't we all miss that? And so even though we're living with this constant undercurrent regarding COVID or our family or our friends or the economy, spending time in nature in our gardens is really so helpful. And I have to say that it's not only a delight for me to spend time in my own garden, but to see what you guys are doing in your gardens. And I think that's very important. Every day that we're able to be in our gardens, we're doing something good for ourselves. We're doing something healthy. And every time we hear about somebody else doing something in their gardens, that's also good for us. That's also a very healthy thing to be seeing and learning from and hearing about. So please keep sending in your gardener greetings. And if you'd like to participate in the gardener greetings segment, all you need to do is share your pictures and your greetings, your birthday wishes or anniversary wishes, or even little garden stories. And go ahead and send them to me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. And another easy way that you can share them is in the Facebook group for the show. So go ahead and do that. If you haven't done it yet, you've been meaning to do it, just take a second today, sit down and share images from your garden with us. It's just a simple way to add something positive and healthy and share it with other gardeners from around the world. All right, here's today's curated news. Today's post is something that I read from the Global Plant Council in June. This post came out and the title really caught my attention because it says, "New research pinpoints which of the world's trees are climate change ready." And this is really such a great question to ask because as home gardeners, most of us will probably plant a tree this summer. And wouldn't you like to plant a tree and know whether or not it can handle some of the temperature changes that we're all experiencing? Well, for this information, we owe a debt of gratitude to the botanists from Trinity College in Dublin. In this post, they share that they've discovered that evergreen species, Christmas trees, holly and ivy, are more climate change ready in the face of warming temperatures than deciduous trees, big-time water consumers like the birch and the oak. And here's what they wrote. Remarkably, we found that with rising CO2, evergreen trees and shrubs are more efficient in using water than deciduous plants in cooler climate locations. That said, there's no evidence for such a pattern in parts of the world with warmer climates. And they write, the reason for the detected differences in the evergreen and deciduous plant responses to climate change lies in their leaf texture. The leaves of evergreens are generally thicker and sturdier than deciduous plants in cooler climates. If you took those two trees and you were in a warmer climate, you would see less of a difference in terms of texture between the leaves. So just something to consider as you're planting trees on your property or as you're assessing your property to determine how well it can handle changes in climate over the coming decades. Well, speaking of weather, today is St. Swithun's Day. St. Swithun was the patron of rain, and the saying goes, if on St. Swithun's Day it rains, it will rain for 40 more days. St. Swithun was a beloved English monk, and he lived during the last part of the 9th century. When he died, he asked that he be buried outside. He didn't want to be buried inside a building or a cathedral. He said he wanted his grave to be able to experience the rain. But 100 years after he was buried, the church decided to move his body to the inside of a cathedral, something Swithun apparently never wanted. And all throughout the next 40 days, it rained, it poured, and there were storms. And that's the origin story for the legend of Saint Swithin. And it resulted in this little rhyme that was passed down through the ages. Saint Swithin's Day, if it does rain, full 40 days it will remain. Saint Swithin's Day, if it be fair, for 40 days 'twill rain no more. That last couplet doesn't rhyme very well, but that nonetheless is how it went. So there you go. We'll see if it rains today and if it's going to rain the next 40 days. You can thank Saint Swithin. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out my curated news articles or original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show. It's called the Daily Gardener Community, and all you have to do is request to join. It's completely free. You don't have to take notes on anything you hear about in the show, and you don't have to track down links. So if you want to read more about that study that was done about climate change and evergreen trees, or my original post on St. Swithin, you can find them all in the Facebook group for the show. So the next time you're on Facebook, just search for the Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the English architect Inigo Jones, who was born on this day in 1573. Inigo introduced classical Roman architecture and the Italian Renaissance to England. He left his mark on London building designs like the classically styled Queen's House for Anne of Denmark. Today, gardeners remember that Inigo designed the layout for Covent Garden Square. The Duke of Bedford asked Inigo to build a residential square using the Italian piazza for inspiration. The Duke felt he had to include a church, but he told Inigo to put up something simple, like a barn. Inigo's famous response was that the Duke would have the finest barn in Europe. Covent Garden became the famous setting for London's farmers' market for over 3 centuries. And today is the anniversary of the death of the botanist John Wilson, who died on this day in 1751. It was John Wilson who first attempted a systematic arrangement of the plants of Great Britain in the English language. From an occupational standpoint, John was a shoemaker and then a baker. And there's a little story that's often told about John with regard to his love of botany. Apparently, John was so intent on learning about botany that he almost sold his only cow to buy a book written by the Scottish botanist and taxonomist Robert Morrison. The transaction would have almost certainly caused John's financial ruin had a neighbor lady not purchased the book for him. And there's another story that reveals John's self-taught botanical expertise and personality. John had traveled to the county of Durham, where he met a man who enjoyed growing rare plants. Certain he could beat John, the man challenged him to a plant naming contest. To his shock and dismay, John was able to name all of the rare specimens in his garden. When it was John's turn, he looked around and grabbed a wild herb growing nearby, which the man simply dismissed as a weed. John stated that the word weed was not sufficient, and he said that the man's answer proved he was merely a gardener and not a botanist. And that's how John Wilson ended up winning the contest. And today we celebrate the birthday of Almira Hart Lincoln Phelps, who was born on this day in 1793. Almira wrote about nature, and her textbook, Familiar Lectures on Botany, was first published in 1829. Almira taught at Amherst Academy, and her textbook was undoubtedly known and used by Emily Dickinson, who was a student there. The following quotes show us that Almira was hip to the idea of mindfulness over 200 years ago. Here's what she wrote. How often are the beauties of nature unheeded by man, who, musing on past ills, brooding over the possible calamities of the future, building castles in the air, or wrapped in his own self-love and self-importance, forgets to look abroad or looks with a vacant stare. Each opening bud and care-perfected seed is a page where we may read of God. And today is the day, back in 1885, that thousands of people watched as Niagara Falls was officially opened. The area had been completely cleaned up, improved, and made accessible. Prior to the restoration, Frederick Law Olmsted said of the falls, "I have followed the Appalachian chain almost from end to end, and traveled on horseback in search of the picturesque, over 4,000 miles, without finding the same quality of forest beauty which was once abundant about the falls." In unearthed words, today's poems are about insects. This first one's by the English Romantic poet John Keats, and it's called On the Grasshopper and the Cricket. The poetry of the earth is never dead. When all the birds are faint with the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new-mown mead. That is the grasshopper's. He takes the lead in summer luxury. He is never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The poetry of the earth is ceasing never. On a lone winter evening, when the frost has wrought a silence, from the stove there shrills the cricket's song in warmth, increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers among some grassy hills. This next piece is from the Danish-American author and illustrator Niels Mogens Bodecker. It's called Midsummer Night Itch. Mosquito is out. It's the end of the day. She's humming and hunting her evening away. Who knows why such hunger arrives on such wings at sundown? I guess it's the nature of things. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, How to Cheat at Gardening and Yard Work by Jeff Bradenberg. This book came out in 2009, and the subtitle is Shameless Tricks for Growing Radically Simple Flowers, Veggies, Lawns, Landscaping, and More. Jeff Bradenberg outlines basic tips for beginning gardeners. He says the right tool can save you time and save your back. That doing less for your lawn actually means a better result. And why planting a diversion crop cuts down on your pest patrol efforts. And that ground covers and foliage plants are no-hassle solutions for weedy flower beds. This book is 384 pages of tips and tricks, and it's all shared with today's gardener in mind. You can get a used copy of How to Cheat at Gardening and Yard Work by Jeff Bradenberg and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $2. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the Irish practical gardener and journalist, the passionate William Robinson, who was born on this day in 1838. It's been fun researching William Robinson, and I came across many different accounts of a story about his early days in horticulture. This gem was particularly memorable, and I thought you'd enjoy hearing about it. When he was young, William Robinson was working on the estate of an Irish baronet. One cold night, the fires for keeping the greenhouses warm failed. The reason is unclear. Whatever the particulars, whether he argued with his boss, forgot to tend the fire, or acted in revenge, the result was that the tender plants in the greenhouse died. That night, William left, and he walked all the way to Dublin, which he did not reach until the following morning. When William arrived in Dublin, he asked for a Dr. David Moore, who was head of the botanical garden. And when they met, he asked him what he should do. Well, Moore must have liked William because he offered him a job on the spot, but not with the greenhouses. Instead, William was put in charge of herbaceous plants, plants that die back in the winter and return in the spring after their season of rest. No greenhouse required. These plants also included English wildflowers. In any case, the truth remains that William Robinson, forever after, did not care for greenhouses, and he did not allow them at Gravetie Manor. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.